Paul did a couple of amazing things. Among those, he built Adjust, which was sold for $1 billion US. And now he does even more fun things, but he will tell you more about that. He's also an investor in EWOR. He mentors fellows occasionally, and he just invested in one of our fellows, Onur. So really cool to see this happening as well.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me, and yeah, excited to see what kind of questions we get. You already did basically the introduction. I founded Adjust, but that wasn't my first company I founded. I actually started off as like a small IT services company that very quickly pivoted into apps as soon as apps became a thing. I'm that old, and from building apps as a publisher, building a lot of tool chains around measuring marketing and kind of trying to understand the arbitrage of marketing, we had developed a tool set that later on would become Adjust, right? And Adjust, for those who don't know, because it's a specialized B2B software. So if you have an app, you need app tracking to tell you how your growth marketing is performing. And there's basically only 2 companies left in the world. And when we started out, there were a few more, but yeah, we survived all of them, surpassed them, and built a global company from Berlin, which I think was, one of the first times we saw that happening, to build a B2B SaaS company, in Berlin, and push it all the way to that, magical unicorn kind of scale. And of course, that was quite the journey, I would say. I guess people always go like, oh, the first million is the hardest. It's not. Yeah, I sold the company about like 2 years ago now. I did 1 more year as the CEO, and then decided to focus on other things in life, and bought a Formula 2, Formula 3, and Formula 4 racing team, and that's what I'm doing in most of the time now when I'm not advising startups or investing and trying to help other people with basically the cheat codes of the things that I've seen, all the mistakes that I made, that I can tell them to don't do that doesn't work, which some of you seem to find helpful. So
yeah, so that's how your life could look like after EWOR, and you still do it superbly well. So yeah, let me ask 1 or 2 questions, and for everyone in the room here, please, start asking your questions in the chat already. I will read them simultaneously, summarize the most common ones, and ask them Paul later. And I will prioritize your questions because this call is for you, right? You want to experience, how it is to be an entrepreneur, maybe also what Paul thinks as an investor now. He has invested in some amazing companies. So shoot your questions. I will read them, and I can't guarantee all of them to be answered, but I can definitely guarantee to pick up the most common ones. Having said that, Paul, you said you did something quite untypical. You started in Berlin, and you've built a global company out of that. Do you want to walk us a little bit through how that happened, and especially how you approached fundraising and internationalization as a European company?
I think that's a very kind of weird thing that comes from the business that we're in, that we looked at this entirely opposite as the rest of the scene in Berlin, as we found out kind of later as we're going along, because app publishing is a global game. If you publish an app, you're publishing in all the markets, like, because you can, right? The App Store is available in all the countries, and so you instantly talking about like a global audience, localization, and everything like that just goes hand in hand. As soon as your app is kind of big enough, you start really looking at where is my customers on this globe, and how do I reach them, and how do I monetize them. And so building a company that caters to these businesses only made sense in a context to say, okay, we have to cater them globally because they're going to be using us globally. So for us, it was like the offset was already like, okay, yeah, we're never going to make a German documentation. Why? Like, our customers speak English. If you can't speak English, you can't publish an app in the App Store. Of course, later on, as Apple started localizing, we did too. But in the beginning, it was like, okay, let's do everything in English. There's no point to do it in Germany. And we never were like, oh, we're going to have a DACH sales team and we're going to focus on selling. We sold to, of course, the first customers were Germans, but the first trip we did was to the US, right? And not much later, we actually went to Japan because we had a lot of questions from there, and people trying to buy our product and use it, and kind of gap that language barrier. And so for us, it was very clear from the get-go that was going to be a global thing. And from the fundraising, we were fortunate enough to find 1 or 2 investors that were like, hey, this sounds sensible. We want to do this. as we found out later, of course, not all of them really had the stomach to go the 10 years to actually that it takes to build like a global leading company. And some of them, exited earlier or got switched out for other investors. But ultimately, we were always able to, at that point in time, find investors that would at least continue to believe in the vision that we had for the next few years, and then evolve even our shareholder structure as the company grew.
I would reckon that to a great extent, this was also your attitude, right? That was driving this forward. Many people, were just in that, narrow European thinking. They weren't doing this. So when you invest now in people, are you looking for a certain attitude also in people? And is it possible to somehow describe this, attitude that makes a successful entrepreneur?
Well, for me, like those are like a lot of questions at once. But let's start with the what I'm looking for. I look for the kind of mindset in the founders to go that they contemplate. When you go like, hey, what makes you think that where you happen to be born is the best market for the product that you happen to build? Why would this be the best place to sell it? And very often, like, you have founders that try to rectify this and go like, oh, what you need as a founder to be like, oh, well, yeah, maybe I need to consider this question. And when you ask them, hey, so what's stopping you from like selling in Singapore? And they're like, well, it's like, it's difficult to support. It's like, well, you don't have an alarm clock. Singaporeans get up 6 hours before you, set an alarm, they speak English, right? So there's your support stuff. And that is something that I'm looking for, is like the founders that then don't go like, yeah, but I'm not going to get up 4 o'clock in the morning to support a customer in Singapore. I'm like, well, then maybe you're not cut out for this job, right? Because ultimately, when you look for entrepreneurs that are willing to take a company ultimately to like a global stage and compete and have the confidence to say, what I'm building is not just like a local knockoff that some American might show up and gracefully buy, but I'm going to do this and I'm going to succeed globally, is a really tough job. There's a reason a lot of American companies stay in America very long and then just buy some stuff as they get bigger, because building it globally is a lot of work. And it usually involves traveling a lot. We're talking like months and months and a year, weeks and weeks on end. And to find founders that have the stomach to say, yeah, if that's what is necessary to be done to succeed, then I'll do that, right? And sometimes, of course, you meet founders that look at this problem and go like, oh, well, that sounds like a lot of work, or I don't really like traveling much, or talking to customers all day. I don't know if that's my jam. When you're like, okay, that's cool, but that's usually then where I know that's not for me.
I like that. In the end, founding a company is not something that, is just distributed equally. If you look at people, it's something that, very rarely people, actually achieve. And I think there's also, a different distribution on attitude that resembles this. And I have a shitload of questions already in the chat. I've picked 3 of them already because they were asked quite common. The first one is, how did you actually find, like your first customers? Once you have a first offering as a startup, especially in tech, sometimes really unclear what your beachhead segment is, what your target customer is. So how did you actually go about saying, this is a good customer, this is someone I want to sell to?
So first of all, we had the grace of being virtually, or me as the head of the product team and the CTO. So I built the product, but I was my own customer. Like, I knew exactly what I was building for. It wasn't that I saw a problem and I was like, oh, I think I can build a solution for this. I had experienced this by myself. I wasn't a publisher, so I knew exactly what I wanted, and I just built that. That is cheating, because it makes it a lot easier to find a product market fit when you are the customer that can go and build something that just scratches that itch. And now you just have to go to someone else, go like, I know you have this problem because everyone has this problem, and I built something for this problem. If you're doing this externally, where you're trying to solve a problem of someone, but not your own, it is much harder, right? Like, then you have to figure this out. But assuming that you've built something that genuinely someone wants to buy, the easiest way to sell it first, and now comes the very, very mean part. It's not where I'm going to be like, oh, you just hustle. No, you just find someone that knows people like that, that'll sell it to them. That's the whole trick. Like, I wish there was some magical, you don't need that person. For me, that person was my CEO, Christian. He just called up all of his friends. He was working at an ad network before, right? So they were selling inventory to all of these ad marketers, just called all of these guys up and go like, I have these tools now. I can do this for you. What I sold you last, maybe it didn't work. Huh? I can measure it now. I can show you. And they bought it. That's the whole trick, right? And then with that validation that the product is actually worth selling, you start finding a sales guy that does the same thing, right? Typically, you find someone from within the industry that has good contacts, at least to start off with, that can do the first couple of sales. Of course, there's the very hard uphill hustle where you just cold call people and try to introduce them to your solution. But honestly, this one sucks ass because it takes forever to convince people that you're not just like some crazy loner that just built a thing, or like your two-bit company is actually worth working with, right? At the beginning, the easiest cheat is to just have someone that has these relations. And it is worth sharing your company with someone like this. Of course, always give them the correct contracts, in case they decide it's not for them. You need to have a way out clause to not just lose your company to someone that just gave it a try. But ultimately, you need someone that has a relevant connection in the field or in the business that you want to work with, because it makes everything 10 times easier. Just showing up to a place where no one knows you, you have no connections in the industry, and trying to sell something to the industry is incredibly frustrating and hard, and maybe leads to a point where you just cannot go on. So instead, to go to someone that's established in the industry, go like, would you like to join me? I'll give you a share of the company if you do this. Christian and I had the idea together, so it came natural, but I've seen other companies go and go like, okay, I need someone with a little bit of street credibility in this industry. So they invite them to the company, give them a shareholding, say like, you become the C, whatever, and like 5% of the company. So you have enough skin in the game to help me sell this. And they go out and they solve this kind of chicken and egg problem that you otherwise kind of encounter.
Amazing, thank you. There's another question that I actually never asked you as well. It was at the very beginning. So I'm gonna, like order them a little bit chronologically along the journey. It was like, how did you actually get started? Did you have a job next to it? Did you raise funding so that you could pay yourself a check? How did you, make it possible in the very beginning?
So that's also, there's different stages in your life where that answer has, or this question has different answers. I just built my first company. My first company was a dinky little IT services company where I worked for the university, and I had maxed out my hours as a student working for the university. And looking at what external contractors would charge for the job I did, I realized I was being vastly underpaid. So I told the university, I'll do what I'm doing now, but I want like 3 times the money. And I'll be a company and I'll write you an invoice. And they agreed because it made sense to them. And so then I started just, through the small network of the local town to get more contracts for IT services, or literally any kind of odd job that you could do, and start out there. And I could support myself because I was 23. At that point, you have 0 standard of living, right? You basically live out of the back of your car if you have to, and a couple of $100 a month go a long way. And then, of course, your tolerance for just not making money any months, or just, taking a little bit longer is extremely high. You can do that. And you have endless energy. When you're beginning of 120 hours a week, it's a cool week, and you still have a little bit of time to go partying, right? When you're like as old as I am now, 40 hours, really long suddenly. And so when we started Adjust, we instantly raised funding. So before we ever built anything, we had raised funding because we already had, Christian had been quite successful within the industry. I had been quite successful as a publisher. So when we went there, I showed them, hey, we have these ideas for the basic tools that we want to put together to build this company. We were able to raise like €1 million pretty quickly. I used that to build the product right away. So how do you start depends a little bit, right? If you're 20, just go for it. I mean, what's the downside, right? That's what when people ask me like, what gave you the courage to do it? It was like, I had nothing to lose. Like, I was dirt poor, and the drop height was literally 0. Like, having no money or having no money is literally the same thing. At least I was trying to do something, right? And of course, that's acceptable when you're just a student. But of course, if you're like in your 30s and have a family to support, maybe the risk assessment looks very different. Then of course you might want to go and try to raise around, but there's also then, of course, you might run a problem where you have no credibility of doing what you want to do, right? Which could be very difficult. So it depends heavily on where you are in your life, where how to finance the beginning, right? Often it makes sense to try to validate at least a little bit your theories and try to use your savings or something like that, and quickly try to go for a round. But again, if you're at the beginning of 20, man, just fucking go for it. Just do it. What you gotta, you need ramen is like still what, 39 cents, and so that's for me like the kind of, yeah. I guess it's not a great answer for those of you that are in their 40s, have like 2 kids and think like, I would really like to have a company. But that's been my experience.
Yeah, I agree. Sometimes, it also gets harder in terms of opportunity costs. And by the way, you're receiving tons of compliments from the chat. Lots of people are really valuing your advice. We also have over 300 people watching right now, so people are definitely sticking around.
Must be a slow day.
Sometimes the truth is appreciated. And let me look through my questions. So the next one we have is more about fundraising, right? You've raised 20 million. So you've seen it from the very beginning to the very end. What were the most common mistakes you see when fundraising? Maybe some even that you did yourself that you wouldn't do anymore with the knowledge you have now.
I want to start with like from the big one and then work a little bit more to the, let's say, technical ones. I think the biggest one is that founders misunderstand the role of like an average fund, right? They are not your friends, and there's rarely any smart money. They're like, everyone says they're smart money, they're great relationships. 90% of the time, that is not true. They're just an absolute fucking drag on your existence. And they are a check, and you should look at it as such, a check that comes with a lot of strings attached, right? And for us, it was clear what we wanted to do before we took the first cent in funding was we're going to build a company to the absolute maximum value that we can build it, and we're totally okay with selling it come the day. Now, I've seen a lot of founders that build companies that they really like, and they just that I don't want to be demeaning when I say like it's a hobby or like it's not a growth focused company. These are valid companies, but they're not companies that should raise money, right? I've seen people a lot of times raise money when they absolutely should not have raised money, either raising too big of a round to where the company really was, specifically in the last few years when it was possible to raise way more money than you needed, and then be stuck in a point where the product and everything wasn't actually at the point where they had raised the money for, or raising money for a company that is slow, almost organically growing, and they just need a little bit of a kick of financing. And now they have a VC on board that, is hustling them, says, my fund life is ending. Well, how are you going to sell? And they're like, oh, well, I didn't want to sell the company ever. So these are the kind of things. The first thing is conception. Go in with a clear mind of what you need to do to fulfill their expectations, because their expectations is to make as much money as possible, and come the day, necessarily with you under the bus, because that's not the point, just maximize their outcome in a fixed set of time. How long is the fund running? What is their expectation? Like, if they invest early in you, their expectation can be 20, 50 times their money back. That's what they've priced in with the success rate. And they will, depending on how the other companies in their fund are going, and they can become quite, let's say, testy, as in they want to make sure that you're, fulfilling the things that you promised in that pitch deck, where you put that little hockey stick in, right? And you put that exponential stuff like 3 years, 4 years away. I mean, fuck future you, that's his problem. Future you will thank you for putting that graph in there if you don't hit it. Because that's suddenly when this really friendly guy that's always been like super cool and super approachable becomes really testy and really like, wow, that's an intense board meeting all of a sudden. What's going on? And why are they talking about replacing me here, right? Like, these things, I've seen them happen. We were very fortunate as we actually overfulfilled the hockey stick. So for us, like we've always sat on a very favorable side of the table with investors, where we had the upper hand in the negotiations because we were doing well. And, profit is oxygen. Like we had oxygen. We could do what we want because we're making money. But if you plan wrong and you sit there and you need money, VCs are not there to optimize for you. They're optimizing for them. So for example, they will not tell you not to spend that million extra in trying. They will tell you to spend it because come the day that you run out of cash and it's not really the time to raise a round, they will give you a bridge for a price, right? It'll not be a great price, and it'll be the first time you learn that they're not your friends. They're there to make money, right? And that's for me, very often founders get in the first kind of, years, they have these kind of rose-colored glasses of, sunshine and rainbows. They're not your friends. They're people that want to make as much money as humanly possible with you. But you have to be very clear on what that means for them and what their goals are and where their goals do not overlap with yours. And that's the first big one. And the second big one is they always overstate their experience and their kind of relevant connections in the field you're talking to. Every VC you will ask will tell you that they have the most awesome network that can do almost anything for you. One single thing, just ask them, prove it. Introduce me to 2 customers. Just do it, right? If they're good, they will do it. Or introduce me to someone relevant that let's say I have an engineering challenge and I want someone who has solved a similar challenge. Prove to me that your network works by introducing me to that guy. And you will see very often that a lot of these, mostly the ones with the biggest talk don't come back to you, right? There's no action on that side, right? So for me, it would be one thing for the founders to, first of all, go in with a clear mind what it means to take VC money and understand what their goals are. And again, how their goals align with your goals. And, to really understand, of course, they're friendly. That's their job, right? And they're good at connecting with people. That's their job, right? And so just because they seem like they're super nice to you and they're super friendly with you, that is at that time. Come time, things will change. Do your due diligence. Ask them to make you introductions to companies that have not succeeded, that have failed with them. Because you're going to call me about like VCs that we had a good time with. Yeah, man, look, we made a lot of money together. It was great. Like, well, that's not a reference call. You want to talk to someone who went into deep shit with them and maybe failed, and ask them how they were. How did they handle that experience, right? And also, how much control do they exert? How much oversight do they want? How much like extra special KPIs do you have to make for their funds so their financial reporting works? How much of your time as a CEO goes into like keeping up with them? This you should like know beforehand. And then I've seen in the fundraising, of course, all the classic mistakes in terms of sometimes I get decks that are meant for angels, right? So I would always cut them with some slack and say like, hey, this isn't really I'm going to raise my around deck. But founders, no one gives a shit about your product. I'm sorry. I say this as the product person. I built one, like I labored 10 years of my life to build something that I cared about. And yet I can tell you, people that want to invest in a company don't give a shit, because I care about the problem you're trying to solve and the opportunity you're trying to capture. I care only about what opportunity are you trying to capture? Do I understand the opportunity? Is it something that maybe I have a little bit of relevant experience with? Something that I believe in? Is it then an opportunity that I think you're right? And once I go, okay, opportunity is there. Okay, you got the greed bit of the investor satisfied. Now you have to cover the fear bit, because these are the only 2 emotions that investors have, is greed and fear, right? Greed is you tell me, okay, there's a lot of money to be made. I'm like, okay, I'm listening. What I want to know now is why are you coming to me and telling me you can do this? I'm now afraid that you can't, right? So you tell me to prove in the deck as quickly as possible and concisely as possible how you want to capture that opportunity. And it's not by telling me about the features of your product. I don't care. No one cares. Like the people that read this are associates of funds sitting in the toilet scrolling through 50 decks, right? So they do all the same thing. They go like opportunity check. Okay, can these people capture the opportunity? Do they sound like sane people that can run a business? Okay, cool. I'm going to look a little bit closer at this deck, maybe ask for some more information. If you don't pass the toilet test that I scroll through your deck in 30 seconds, and I don't get what you're trying to capture, where the money is coming from, and why you are uniquely positioned to do so, I'm out. And that's not just me. That's like everyone will just at best tell you, hey, it's a little early for us, or whatever standard text they send you when they just don't want to talk to you, right? And so I've seen a lot of founders mistake what a pitch deck should be about, right? That they're trying to pitch a product instead of actually pitching an opportunity and pitching themselves, being able to capture that. I think that's the biggest one in terms of, or where they go off on like some rambling sideways. If your grandma can't read this and go like, oh, this sounds like a good investment opportunity, it is not interesting. Like the explain me like I'm 5, your average investor spends as much mental capacity as a 5-year-old looking at your stuff. It's not they're stupid. It's just they have a lot of things to go through. They see a lot of things. So of course, they're not going to go and try to think around the corner of trying to understand what your unique kind of idea can do or not, right? And I think these are the to structure a pitch deck so concisely that I'm like, okay, check. Okay, let's talk. That is something that I think founders need to be able to take like 2 steps back and reflect as like a neutral party. If I'm looking at your deck, do you have any fucking clue what's going on? And if the answer is no, start over. And if your initial pitch deck has more than like 10 pages, dude, Shakespeare, cut it. We're not like reading Peace and Freedom here. One Piece, sorry. Just give me like a simple thing that explains to me what's going on, and then we can sit down and talk more. And yeah, I think that would be like the absolute highlights. And of course, fundraising also goes into the understanding the structures. Yeah, okay, maybe that the last one that I wish founders also understand how VCs work. How are they structured? Who's an associate? When you're like, oh, I'm having a meeting with a VC. If you made an associate, you haven't met anyone, dude. Like they employed these minions in droves to be able to screen hundreds, if not thousands of cases. You haven't met the VC unless you've met a partner or you talked to a partner or been to the partner meeting. Then you've met a VC. Otherwise, you just had coffee with someone who goes to have coffee with people for a living, right? That's also very big when you ask founders, hey, which funds are you talking to? Oh, we're talking to all of these funds. Are these all associates? Yes. Well, then you're not talking to them. They just know of you now. Congratulations. But they know of you and 10,000 other companies, right? So to understand a little bit, what is the process? And to also drive a timeline with a VC, not just to talk and casually date, but to go, hey, we have a timeline. We want to be able to raise within the next 6 weeks, 8 weeks. Does that fit within your next partner meeting? What is your timeline? To be trying to put some kind of deterministic end to the talking to each other, because VCs are also really good talking to you for like years in circles, waiting until they feel your company has reached the point that they want to invest, but wasting your time in the process. Okay, sorry, it was a really long answer, but it's
a very good question. One. I see all the associates in the chat railing against you right now, being like, that's a serious job. Just kidding.
I'm sure it's a serious job. I'm just telling the founders that there's a significant difference, that they're not the ones making the investment decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think no associate comes to a VC with the expectation of, making the investment decisions. I think people know what they're into, but they're just invited for a good joke. And also another quick anecdote, when I raised my first million, I looked at the average time that people looked at my deck, and it was 1 minute, 20 seconds average time. So they could not have possibly read the slides. They just look for the quick proof points at you, and then they decide whether they want to meet. And then they listen to a longer pitch, right? And if your deck is not able to create excitement within 1 minute and 20 seconds, and of course, averages are not great. And we have so many more questions, so I'm kind of figuring, how to make this a little bit more focused on like the topic we are currently already discussing. It's kind of, like the very early stages. And there's one question that really asks about, how do you determine the good hires, especially in the beginning? How did you go for making, let's say, the first 10, 20 good hires that you made at Adjust?
Oh, that's a fantastic question, because there's no such thing. That is one of the greatest myths. You don't know. Like, first of all, like today, of course, you tell me, hey, build a new company that builds this. I call 20 people I know, and I'm done with this by like lunch, and we can get going. And I know I got like an absolute A team. You, as a new founder, don't have that network. That's just how the world works. You have a bunch of friends that might be good at certain things, and you hope that the one old dude that you brought into the company has some older friends that have been around long enough to have some relevant experience and connections. But that's about it. The key point isn't to understand how do you get good hires. The real question is, can you understand when you made a bad hire? Because that is much harder to get for the founders, but it is doable to understand, like, because that's within your control. It is not really within your control how good your hires are specifically at the beginning. You can give it your best shot and try to hire the best people from like your gut feeling or the resume, but there's no real trick to it. The real trick is to understand, oh man, I fucked up. And the hardest bit of all of this is to fire someone. And the worst case is like you got your friend in that promised he'd be like this god level coder, and it's been 3 months now, and you're realizing this isn't really true. And I've seen too many founders then go like, well, I'm just gonna push him aside a little bit, just a little bit, and deal with that problem later. 3 years later, VCs ask you, who's that dude that owns like 15% of the company that we never heard of? Like, yeah, that's a dude we parked somewhere deep down in the tech department where he can't harm people. Like, what? The problem is that's the best case scenario because you just wasted a whole bunch of equity. But the real problem is you made a bad hire and it drags down the entire organization, where they demotivate the team because they can see like, why is he around? Or they create a really bad atmosphere. They destroy your culture, right? Bad hires can be absolute poison for a company, but it is so hard for founders, specifically when you're doing this the first time, to step and say like, listen, this isn't working, you're out. To fire someone, and maybe worst case, to have to fire a friend, is something that I would ask you whenever you hire someone. Ask yourself the question, am I okay with firing them again? Because if the answer is like, no, that's my girlfriend, I can't fire her, don't fucking hire, right? Just don't. Like, don't hire anyone you would not feel comfortable firing again. You cannot know for sure that they're going to perform the way that you need them to perform when you're starting out. There's no way to know. And so the more important question is what is the measure? What is the measure that I'm going to say this is a job well done, or this is a job not well done, or this is absolute the lowest bar, you're out. And the funny thing is where founders go like, hey, how do I know when it's time to let someone go? Like, I have this is a discussion I have the most with like new teams. They're like, hey, we have this one guy and he's like, we don't really know. You're coming to me, you're talking about it, you already know the fucking answer. You do, right? I tell them like, there's nothing I can tell you that you don't already know. You know what you have to do. You're just coming to me trying to excuse yourself for not doing it. You coming to me bringing up that this one sales guy hasn't sold anything in 6 months, but you really like him and maybe he'll figure it out. No, you already know the answer, right? It's just, it's tough. And it's one of those humans try to avoid confrontation, right? Like, it's what we're programmed into, like we're social beings and we're being, it's awkward to have a confrontational situation, to go to tell someone that they haven't done the job well, which is also maybe the one advice that I can give you. When you let someone go, don't go there like, I'm firing you because you suck, because you haven't done this, and this. There's not a single person in the world that will take that criticism in any constructive way at that point. They just won't. You just sit down and say, listen, this isn't working, right? Let's talk about how we can make this peaceful for everyone involved, and let's just go our separate ways. That's it. And that's the whole talk. Don't sit there, tell your life story. Don't let them tell their life story. Just, get it over with. And that for me is 1,000 times more crucial than be like, how do I find good hires? I don't know. Try some people, do your very best, but make sure you get rid of them if they're dragging down your team, because that is something that I've seen over and over again. People that sit and fester within companies, trying to rot whole parts of the organization when everyone in the company knows that they should have been fired like years ago, right? So don't make that mistake.
I love it. And we have another question that is a little bit provocative, I would say. Do you still have your elevator pitch ready? And can you still pitch your startup? Because I would love to hear it.
It's been 12 years. I'm sorry. I don't have it anymore. And today, the thing is also me, 12 years later, it's the thing is like the having done these things and having succeeded at the things that you set out to do, of course, gives you a very different confidence. I would find it weird, and I find it weird when you have young founders that are too confident, where you're like, listen, dude, you've proven it. Okay, fine, you can do it. But don't be cocky for things you haven't done and you don't know, right? Understand what you know, that you don't know certain things, and go approach the task with a reasonable level of respect. I'm not saying you should say that, but a certain level of humbleness sometimes goes a long way. And so, of course, for me now, like, I wouldn't have to elevate that pitch. That's the thing. Like, I'll call people and go like, hey, give me $1 million, let's go, right? It's unfair like this. But it's also you have to earn your right to do this. And so for me, it's difficult to go back 12 years ago, where I was sitting there like kid from a small town that had only done like one bootstrap company, trying to raise what for me was a fantastic number of money, like 1 million euros. Where I was like, who the fuck is out of their mind and gives me 1 million euros, right? So no, there's, for me, there would be no way to give you like an authentic experience that isn't like completely fake. Me being like, yeah, well, sold a company for over $1 billion. Now I can pitch you like, yeah, no.
Yeah. What's your opinion on corporate VCs?
Depends. Depends heavily on the corporation. So they can give sometimes a very viable kind of connection set. They can be the shortcut to the older guy that I told you to find that has a relevant experience set and connection set. They can be that guy. But very often I found corporate VCs to be a little overbearing, as in they're already treating you like they already bought you when they only invested, but they want to exercise the same corporate control they have within their organization, which can be suffocating and also completely maddening, because they don't understand startups. That's why they've started a VC, because they can't do new stuff anymore, because they're now an oil tanker with, I don't know, 20,000, 100,000 people that can't even turn 1 degree, leave alone innovate. And so they're trying to like have their cake and eat it by investing in startups and still pretending, that you work on their punch clock and just, have to wear a suit for their board meeting. I would say check very closely how much you need access they can give you versus the very typical, absolute insane level of over control they want to exert. Do your reference calls, like always do your reference calls, right? And and ask questions like, hey, how often a week do you talk to these guys? And they're like, well, no, they have a desk right next to me. You're like, okay, maybe, that's not a thing I want to do, right? So, yeah, I would say it can be helpful. Say you want to break into a space like some medical thing that certification is almost impossible to get for, or defense stuff, where like, yeah, there's no way you're gonna sell this to any organization that you can't get some street credibility from some big guy. Then you need them. But anything else, I would always be very careful if it's really that necessary.
And we've touched on this a little, but people have followed up on this. When we talk about angel investors, what makes a good angel investor? You've already talked about smart and dump money, but maybe you can go into a little bit more detail.
I have no idea. People keep asking me to invest, but no. I think the key point. So when you pick your angel investor, don't pick angel investors just because they're willing to give you money. I know that's very hard. At the beginning, you need that cash. You were young and needed the money is like the number one thing for founders, right? But don't just angel anyone because they're willing to give you money. Sometimes holding on a little bit longer and finding a more relevant angel can be so much more useful than I've seen decks where suddenly like some lawyer had like 20% of the company. We're like, what the fuck happened there? Like, oh, he was the first one that was willing to invest. And was like, how do you plan on getting rid of him? And which investor are you at your current valuation asking to spend $1 million on getting rid of this guy without adding a single cent towards the company's like cash flow? No one does that. Like, you've just poisoned your cap table for what, right? For like 20K investment 3 years ago. That was a dumb fucking idea. So when you pick an angel, don't just try to go for, oh, well, it was any person willing to give me money. It's usually not a good criteria. Also, honestly, just going for like name bragging rights when like I got this guy, this guy typically then ends up having like 200 investments. And it's really just, okay, you got like this guy, but everyone at a certain point knows, okay, this guy is just in everything. And the VCs know, right? The VCs understand, like I'm really trying to keep it to a small-ish number of companies that I'm angel investing, and a very small number of companies where I'm actually investing like some real money, so that I actually sit down with them and work with them on a regular basis. Because for me, it's a thing about, first of all, my own time. I don't feel like working a full job. So, why would I want to try to advise 100 companies? And also credibility. Like you can't think about like so many cases at a time. So check what the other investments are and what their involvement is. And again, reference calls, right? Like when someone comes to me, typically just because they've heard from another company that I'm working with, and at least with an expectation level of what we want from each other. And so when you find an angel, to find someone that has a relevant experience set, because really I know the first money is so hard to get, and it's so nice when someone goes like, oh, I'm going to give you 50K ticket, but really try to find people that can give you the relationship or introduction or experience, right? Like I know the cheat codes to some of this SaaS stuff and some of this B2B stuff, because I've seen it and I've seen all the things that don't work, and I can tell you, just don't do this, go there. That's very helpful, at least for some companies. If you find other ones that are very good in sales or building sales organization, check a little bit in which field. Like, have you built something that can sell someone like me? Do you have introductions for me, right? And try to also check, if you'd ask me to help, like typically I advise companies and then invest. I never invested and then advised, because, I was like, if they like what I'm telling them, or if I'm helpful for them, they're not going to take my advice and run away with it, right? So a good angel investor will be willing and able to help you with a problem you have right now, and you can still ask him to invest. If he's like, oh no, I'm only I'm only helping you after I invest. No, like stay away. These are dudes that do this for the money in like more of a short-term kind of thing, or trying to grab as much equity from literally anyone they can get their hands on, which means they're usually not very helpful, right? So that might be my kind of key advice there. Ask them to help you. And if they help you and they are actually helpful, then yeah, maybe they're a good angel for you.
Best due diligence also works for hiring, right? Just hire them, look what they're doing, and then for investing, it's easier. You can ask them to do all of the stuff before they invest, even better than hiring. Don't even have to fire someone. Love it. We have another interesting question, to which I think I know the answer to. Are you going to build another startup? And if so, are you going to build it with the same mindset? And let's make this, in case you're not, if you would you build it with another mindset now?
So at the moment, the answer is no. But, I wouldn't say never. Right? There's some things that are looking interesting where I'd be like, man, must be fun to try that. And of course, you sometimes talk to your old gang and we're like, hey, want to get the band back together. But I think so far the answer is still like, guys, we need a little bit more time to like digest this and calm down a little bit. It was a stressful time. It was a long time. So I don't want to categorically say no. There might come the day. But at the moment, it's not really where I'm like, this is my focus. I enjoy running like the racing teams, and once I have them in a stable situation where they can, sustain themselves and be successful, then maybe I get a little bit bored, and then what'll happen will happen. The mindset would be, I'd say, 1,000,000 times more ruthless and just much more focused on what I want to achieve, right? Like, what is the company for? Am I building a company to like say, I want to build my everlasting legacy, or be like, this is an opportunity that can make a fuck ton of money? Then yes, but say if it's the later, it'll be built and focused on doing one thing and one thing only, which is make money, right? And to optimize that. And if you understand that within the team, it's not like, it doesn't mean like, who's this holders money back. No, everyone can work towards the same goal. They understand. You make sure that the rewards work the same. I would, for example, give much more equity to the employees that I don't have to give out to VCs, because I can use my own money, right? To make sure I have my employees work as hard as I want to work on this, and to push and have the same kind of forward mentality, and just pick the right people that you have from your network that to go forward. So the company would be much more streamlined on fuffing around that, you've done for 10 years, that, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this doesn't work. We'll be like, I know the things that work. Let's do all the things that work, and let's do them as efficiently and as quickly and as scalable as possible, and scale them out hard and fast. But I think that would be the main point in comparison to say, adjust. I would say instead of doing it in 12 years, I could do it probably in 6.
We had a very interesting follow-up question on that one, which is, as a second-time founder, you can still do mistakes. What is your advice to second-time founders that had a reasonable exit, but maybe not big enough to completely retire? What should they be aware of?
Your blind spots. I think that's a lot of what I've seen founders that sold a company. And it's usually always in the same kind of range where the founders make good money, but like you still got to work kind of money. Not like, it's Mojito Island and sunshine for the rest of your life, independent of it boring or not. Very successful first-time founders I've seen be very successful second-time founders. Like that's, for me, people that sell their first billion-dollar company typically manage to sell a second one, unless it was like a real crazy strike of luck there. But for anyone that has had the success of selling a company, maybe you built something that was really hot at the time, someone paid you $20 million for the company, you're like, hey, this is pretty cool. I only have to split this with like one VC and like, 2 angels and one co-founder. Was pretty good. Typically, you overestimate how well you've understood what this game you're playing is, right? And you now consider yourself a universal genius. The first thing I tell founders when they come with stuff that I have no fucking clue about is to say, I have no fucking clue. I don't know. And to say I don't know, I've seen struggles some successful founders with a lot. When they like run around and have an opinion on anything. Like if I'm watching there's this German version of Dragon's Den. Fuck me sideways. These people have an opinion on anything, but I'm pretty sure expertise on nothing, right? This is where I know one of these guys in person. I know that to be a true fact. And so the thing is, you have this hubris of where you think you know everything. And this is where understand what you've done right, understand also the luck you had. This for me is, as a founder, I understand the very luck. We had like 3 or 4 incredibly lucky breaks in our existence as a company that allowed us to propel at this crazy hockey stick speed. And we appreciated these opportunities, and we understood that was simply luck. We were there to seize that opportunity, but that was luck. That was not within our control. It happened without us doing anything for it. And it's important that you understand that played a role at that point in time, so that the next time you go around, you understand that might not happen again, that you just got really fucking lucky at that point, right? And so to understand these things when you had luck and the things you don't know, to go and try to reflect on these things. And the same time, at least for me, doing it longer, the first 3-4 years, I would have been a horrible second-time founder, gotta admit. Like, think like everything, that I'm saying is right. I cannot be wrong and everything's great. 10 years, you become a little bit more okay. Like, I understand that I know nothing and I should ask experts, or at least consider the opinion of other people, and really listen to advice that I understand now what good advice sounds like, and I'm trying to listen to it when I get it, right? Or typically when it's about subject matter, I ask an expert to explain it to me, maybe even twice, or ask 2 people to explain it to me so I can make an informed decision, to make good decisions, right? That's what I would say for a second-time founder. Stop thinking you know all the answers. You don't. Just to try to sit down and go like, okay, what do I know for a fact that I've done? And with the reflection of when you got lucky, you can do that. But outside of that, understand who you can ask, or that you have to try these kind of things, and don't be too sure, right? Like, I mean, there's an ability you have to build over time anyway, to reflect, to have the, let's say, the confidence to do things, but also the reflection to say, okay, maybe that was a bad idea, right? And to strike that balance, and to continuously challenge yourself, and never let go, never let the hype get to you. Never believe your own kind of marketing.
Let's do a last question. Let's maybe end on a boring one, but I've seen that a couple of times in there, so it clearly interests you. What about investor communication and frequency? Like, how do you go about investor updates, board meetings, and so on? What is your advice there? And then we're going to close afterwards.
Well, that is boring indeed. Maybe we can do one less boring question. But so
okay.
do it monthly, track sensible KPIs, make your financial report, like make the highlight items there. I want to know what your cash flow is. I want to know what your revenue is. I want to know what your margin is. Right. So don't try to fuff about too much with like, what's your cost? What's your income? What's your runway? Right. What's going on there? What does your burn look like, and why is there any kind of one-off things in there, and tell me the kind of highlights of what's going on in terms of product. And don't like no one wants to know a million things. Like tell me like the top 3 things and the bad 3 things, and also tell me bad stuff happening. Like that's, I think, the worst thing I've seen in investor communication is like you get your report, sometimes skip a month, we're like, okay. And then suddenly you get like, by the way, we're bankrupt, we're filing for bankruptcy. We're like, what the fuck just happened, right? If stuff isn't going great, communicate it and explain what you're doing about it, right? And maybe sometimes you can just also go, I could really appreciate help on these topics, right? So good investor updates also asks for input on certain things. We were like, hey, when you send an email to your angels, go like, guys, I need an introduction to these and these people. Any one of you can help. I've seen this work very well for founders. So, communicate open enough so that people have a good idea where the company is headed, right? Be clear and concise on the financial side. Show that you're not like some crazy criminal trying to run away with the money, right? Don't do shady stuff in general. Maybe that's also a good idea. And just like, make a report that a human can read quickly enough, right? Because that's also, when I scan this 2 minutes later, I want to know like, you're doing okay, you're not doing great, or you're doing fantastic, or like, holy shit, that thing's about to keel over, right? This is the kind of, okay, this is what I want to know, right?
Yeah. Then let's do a last interesting one. So what is the single most difficult challenge that you needed to solve at Adjust, and how did you solve it?
Oh, I love that question, because it's I think the most difficult challenge was to, and I think that's a very universal challenge for every founder that I've known to succeed so far, that made it very far, is to get out of your comfort zone over and over and over again, to make it a habit to go out of your comfort zone. So first of all, I'm a lazy son of a bitch, and I hate dealing with people. Like, I'm a product guy, I'm a programmer, I develop things, right? Like I build my tools, I have a little test that goes green, I'm happy. So the first time I had to do support to the customers, because we didn't have anyone in support, was absolutely fucking miserable. They asked me the dumbest shit in the world that was clear to me, but it's like, why are they asking me these dumb questions? And as it turns out, you can't call your customers dumb sons of bitches in emails. You can't. You have to be nice. You have to be polite to tell them they're dumb sons of bitches for even asking you. So you hire someone to onboard them to become a support. But that means you have to teach someone that has absolutely no clue about what you've built. And if it's something really complicated, you have to tell that to basically the explain me like I'm 5 version. Today I can do this. I've developed the patience to do it. But at the beginning, it was like the first 2 account managers we had quit because I was being too impatient trying to teach them. So I had to learn to be more patient, unless I wanted to do customer emails for the rest of my life. Same goes for, I hate flying, not because of fear of flying. I hate the whole airplane situation, sitting in that, tube with 300 people breathing in my mouth. It's like the worst thing ever. And yet I had to fly in the last year before COVID. I flew 52 long distance flights. I hated every fucking minute of it. But it was necessary to do, because like the first trip I made to China, I sold $1 million in inventory in 5 days. I was like, okay, I hate this, but I like the $1 million. So let's do it again and again and again and again. And that for me is the biggest thing, is to understand what needs to be done. Or for example, public speaking is never been like my favorite thing. I was not bad at it as like a student. It was like, okay, but it wasn't going to be like, oh, fuck yeah, let's go to the MAU in Vegas and speak in front of 500 people for fun. But it's necessary. Or you have a company presentation, like you want to lead a company with 500 people, 200 people. Do you feel confident standing in front of them and selling them your vision in a way that they will actually follow you to do so? Like, will they follow you? No? Well, then learn how to do it. Like, you don't like it? Like, that's Chris and I actually worked with an actor at the beginning to help us to get out of this standing there with a microphone. Do I like it? Nowadays, it's more like, yeah, I can do it. It's fine. It's not a thing I love doing, but I know how to do it, right? And it's all of these steps to continuously push yourself and not go like, oh, I don't want to do this. Whenever I hear from a founder, like a sales, I hire someone, I will not do it. No, you'll do it, right? Get off your ass, grow a pair, and then do it, right? That's the thing. This is not a being comfortable challenge. This is not how comfortable can you be while doing this. This is, you see what needs to be done and you go and do it, and to push yourself to manage to continuously find when you're doing this, because it's at the beginning, humans have a hard time catching yourself, because humans can rectify literally anything to themselves, like any heinous thing you can totally explain to yourself. And I'm guilty as charged, right? Like, all the things that I've just talked about that I told you don't do it, I've did all of those things. Every single one of them I did. That's how I know, right? And over time, you build this, man, you're doing this again. You're lying to yourself. You're like, you know what you need to do. You need to do this, so go and do it. Stop fuffing about, stop crying, go and do it. And that is, I think, for me, that was the hardest bit, because there were so many points where I really thought, wow, I'm so uncomfortable doing this. This is not what I signed up for. I signed up sitting there on the desk coding something, and suddenly I'm standing in Vegas, 500 people looking at me, or standing in front of, like, we've rented a huge cinema in Berlin when we had over 500 employees, and standing there and presenting our product vision for the next 5 years and getting these people to actually walk in that direction, right? Is where we're standing. We're like, that is very different than sitting in front of a computer and making my code run, right? And I haven't coded in years because I didn't have time to do this. I had to, deal with the challenge of leading that many people in hopefully the correct direction. And yeah, I think that's universal. All the founders I've seen all struggle with this. And this is, I think, maybe the most helpful input I can give as someone that has been there, is to help you, with that little push to say, you already know, like, most of the time when you sit there and you're listening to me and go like, yeah, I think I know, exactly what I'm talking about. Like, you have that one example in your life right now where you're like, yeah, I guess he's right. Yes, I am. It's just this, like, let me tell you from the future, you already know what to do. Like, just fucking do it. Just rip off that fucking band-aid and get over with it and move on, right? And then keep pushing. And if you do this often enough, with enough iterations, and you get a little bit lucky, it'll pay off, right? That's pretty much the trick, I guess.
I'm really glad I asked that question. Single biggest mistake of today would have been to not ask that question at the at the very end. That was absolutely fantastic, and I love those talks with you, because you're just so blunt, and at the same time, so straightforward with your advice. The chat was burning with positive comments. Everyone really likes this. Your radical candor. And all sorts of descriptions for it, but I can only resonate that. We've done that a couple of times now, and I'm always amazed by it. So thank you so much for doing this today with us. It's really been a blast. I think 300 plus people today have really learned lots of interesting entrepreneurial lessons. On top of this, to everyone who listened, we will have additional webinars also about the programs, right? We just did 3 of those. So we're now going to have this one and the next one, which is about entrepreneurial stories. But don't worry, after that, we will chat again about, how's the program actually looking. We will have alumni present who talk about their experience. I've seen that some of you wanted to know that stuff as well. So bear with us. That will come in the future. So not much left to say, but wishing you all a lovely day. You too, Paul. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Dana, are we off? Probably.